No one wanted to admit it, but the entire wedding hall shifted the moment he walked in. The musicians played softer. The guests stepped aside. Even the groom's family pretended not to see him. The Mafia boss, Adrian Marcello, took a seat in the very last row, alone, uninvited, unwanted. His black suit stood out like a shadow in a room full of roses and white silk. People whispered behind their champagne glasses. Why is he here? Is he protecting someone? Did the bride invite him? No one dared approach him. No one even breathed too loudly near him. But Adrian didn't care. His eyes stayed fixed on the bride, a woman he had known only through rumors and distant glances. Then the ceremony began. She walked down the aisle, radiant, slow, graceful, and yet her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for something, someone. And when her gaze finally landed on him, she stopped walking. The entire hall froze. Then, quietly, trembling, she spoke his name, the name no one dared to say out loud in public. Adrian. The groom stiffened. The families stared in horror. The boss slowly rose to his feet, unsure what she knew, or why she'd called for him now, on the most important day of her life. The truth she revealed next would tear open old secrets and change the wedding forever. Stay with me until the end, because what the bride tells the Mafia boss will rewrite everything everyone in that hall thought they knew about love, loyalty, and family. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. The morning had started like any other wedding day for Isabella Romano. Hair appointments at 7, makeup by 9, photographs with the bridesmaids by noon. Her mother fussed over every detail while her father paced nervously in his tuxedo. Everything was perfect. Everything was planned. Everything was exactly as it should be for the daughter of one of Chicago's most respected families. But Isabella carried a secret that weighed heavier than her grandmother's pearl necklace. A secret that had kept her awake for weeks leading up to this moment. 24 hours earlier, she had received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph and a note written in careful handwriting. The photograph showed a man she had never seen before, standing next to her father 30 years ago. Both men were young, both smiling, both wearing the same military uniform. The note read simply, "Your father saved my life in Vietnam. I owe him everything. I will be there tomorrow to honor that debt, whether he wants me there or not." It was signed, Adrian Marcello. Isabella had heard that name whispered in her household her entire life, always in hushed tones, always followed by her father quickly changing the subject or leaving the room entirely. She knew Adrian Marcello was dangerous. She knew he controlled half the city's underground operations. She knew her father's construction company had somehow never faced the labor problems that plagued their competitors. What she didn't know was why. Her father, Vincent Romano, had built his empire through honest work and careful planning. He employed hundreds of people, donated to charities, attended church every Sunday. He was everything a respectable businessman should be. But Isabella had always sensed there was more to the story. The way certain phone calls made him tense. The way he checked the locks twice every night. The way he insisted on driving her to school personally until she turned 18. Now, standing in her wedding dress in the bridal suite, she stared at that photograph again. Her father looked so young, so different from the careful, measured man she knew today. In the photo, he was laughing with genuine joy, his arm thrown casually around Adrian's shoulders. They looked like brothers. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Father McKenna entered with a gentle smile. "Isabella, your father asked me to check on you. Are you ready?" She folded the photograph carefully and tucked it into her bouquet. "As ready as I'll ever be, Father." The ceremony location was the grand ballroom at the Palmer House, the same venue where her parents had married 28 years earlier. 300 guests filled the ornate space, representing the best of Chicago society. Business leaders, politicians, judges, and philanthropists all gathered to celebrate the union of Isabella Romano and Michael Castellano. The Castellano family owned the largest restaurant chain in the Midwest. The marriage would unite two powerful, legitimate businesses and create opportunities that would benefit both families for generations. Everything was planned. Everything was perfect, until Adrian Marcello walked through those doors. Isabella watched from behind the ceremony curtain as the ripple effect moved through the crowd. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned, bodies shifted uncomfortably. Her father's face went white as marble. Michael's family exchanged worried glances. His mother clutched her husband's arm and whispered urgently in his ear. But Adrian simply walked to the back row and sat down. He didn't acknowledge anyone. He didn't speak to anyone. He just waited. Isabella's hands shook as she held her bouquet. The photograph hidden among the white roses felt like it was burning against her fingers. Father McKenna appeared at her side. "Isabella, there seems to be some commotion. Perhaps we should delay the ceremony for a few minutes." "No." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "We start now." The music began. The doors opened, and Isabella Romano stepped into the moment that would change everything. She had practiced this walk 100 times. Down the aisle, eyes forward, smile bright, measured steps in time with the music. She knew exactly where to look, exactly how to hold her head, exactly when to pause for the photographers. But as she walked, her eyes searched the crowd, past the smiling faces of her cousins, past her mother's proud tears, past the nervous excitement of the bridesmaids, until she found him. Adrian Marcello sat perfectly still in the back row, his hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 55, with silver threading through his dark hair. His face was weathered but handsome, marked by years of making difficult decisions. When their eyes met, something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, the weight of secrets about to be revealed. Isabella stopped walking. The music continued for a few more notes before trailing off into silence. 300 guests held their breath. Michael stood at the altar, confusion written across his face. Father McKenna stepped forward slightly, ready to help if something was wrong. But Isabella only had eyes for the man in the back row. "Adrian," she said quietly, but in the sudden silence, her voice carried to every corner of the ballroom. The name hit the crowd like a physical blow. Gasps echoed through the space. Someone dropped a program. A woman in the third row grabbed her husband's hand so tightly he winced. Adrian Marcello slowly rose to his feet. His face remained impassive, but Isabella caught the slight widening of his eyes. He hadn't expected this. Isabella reached into her bouquet and pulled out the photograph. She held it up so he could see it across the distance between them. "You knew my father in Vietnam," she said, her voice growing stronger. "You saved each other's lives, and you've been protecting our family ever since." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled guests. Murmurs erupted as people tried to process what they were hearing. Vincent Romano stood from his seat in the front row, his face a mixture of panic and resignation. "Isabella, please. Not here. Not now." But his daughter was just getting started. The truth that had been buried for 30 years was about to surface, and nothing would ever be the same. Would ever be the same. Vincent Romano's voice cracked as he stepped into the aisle. "Isabella, sweetheart, let's discuss this privately. This isn't the time or place." But Isabella held the photograph higher, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "This is exactly the time and place, Dad. These people need to know the truth about our family." Adrian remained standing, his dark eyes fixed on the photograph in her hands. Even from across the room, he could see the image clearly. Two young soldiers, arms around each other's shoulders, both grinning despite the mud and exhaustion etched on their faces. "Saigon, 1972, Isabella continued, reading from the back of the photograph. "Sergeant Vincent Romano and Corporal Adrian Marcello, 3rd Infantry Division." The guests exchanged bewildered glances. Vincent Romano had never mentioned military service. In 30 years of building his construction empire, he had crafted an image of a self-made businessman who started with nothing but determination and honest work. Michael stepped down from the altar, his face flushed with confusion and growing anger. "Isabella, what are you doing? This is our wedding day." She turned to face her groom, still holding the photograph. "Michael, did you know my father was a war hero? Did you know he earned a Purple Heart and 2 Bronze Stars?" Michael's mouth opened and closed without sound. Behind him, Father McKenna watched the scene unfold with growing concern. "Did you know," Isabella pressed on, "that he saved 12 men from a burning helicopter? That he carried wounded soldiers through enemy fire for 3 days straight?" Vincent's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Baby, please. Some things are better left buried." But Isabella wasn't finished. She walked closer to Adrian, each step deliberate and measured. The guests parted before her like water, nobody wanting to interfere, but unable to look away. "And did you know," she said, now addressing the entire ballroom, "that Adrian Marcello carried my father 6 miles through the jungle when Dad took shrapnel in his leg? That he gave up his own water rations to keep my father alive?" Adrian's stoic expression finally cracked, revealing a flicker of pain. "That was a long time ago, Miss Romano." Isabella shook her head. "It wasn't a long time ago for you, was it? You've been watching over us ever since you both came home." The pieces began falling into place for some of the guests. Vincent Romano's construction company had never faced union troubles. His projects always received permits without delays. His workers were never harassed or intimidated by the criminal elements that plagued other businesses. Isabella pulled a second item from her bouquet, a folded letter. She opened it carefully, her hands steadying as she read aloud. "This was delivered to our house yesterday. It says, 'Vincent, I know you don't want anything to do with your old life, but your daughter's wedding is being watched by people who wish your family harm. The Torino family has been planning something for months. They blame you for their father's arrest last year. I will be there to make sure nothing happens to Isabella or your guests. You don't owe me anything, brother. I owe you everything.'" The letter was signed, simply, "Adrian." Vincent's face went ashen. "The Torinos? But that case was handled by federal prosecutors. I had nothing to do with—" "You testified against Marcus Torino," Adrian interrupted, his voice cutting through the ballroom like a blade. "Your construction company found those bodies buried on the Riverside project. You did the right thing, Vincent, but doing the right thing made you enemies." The revelation sent fresh waves of shock through the crowd. Several guests near the back began moving toward the exits, but Adrian's presence seemed to freeze them in place. Isabella looked at her father with new understanding. "All those nights you checked the locks twice. All those times you insisted on driving me places yourself. You weren't being overprotective. You were being careful." Vincent nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes. "I wanted to give you a normal life, sweetheart. I wanted you to grow up without fear, without looking over your shoulder every day." Michael stepped forward aggressively. "So our families have been living under the protection of a criminal?" His voice rose with each word. "Do you have any idea what this means for our reputation? For our businesses?" Isabella turned to face him, and for the first time, everyone could see the steel in her spine. "Our families have been living under the protection of a man who honors his debts and keeps his word. A man who asks for nothing in return." "But he's a criminal," Michael insisted. "Everyone knows what Adrian Marcello does for a living." Isabella's eyes flashed with anger. "And what exactly does he do, Michael? Tell me what you know about him, besides the rumors and the whispers." Michael faltered, realizing he had no concrete answers. "He deals in illegal activities." "Everyone knows that." Adrian spoke for the second time, his voice quiet but commanding absolute attention. "I own 7 legitimate businesses that employ over 400 people. I pay my taxes. I donate to 3 orphanages and 2 veterans' hospitals. I have never been convicted of any crime in my life." "But the rumors," Michael stammered. "Are rumors," Adrian finished. "Started by men who wanted to believe that success in this city could only come through corruption." Isabella moved closer to Adrian, close enough now that she could see the sadness in his dark eyes. "You've been protecting us for 30 years, watching from a distance, making sure we were safe, never asking for anything in return. Adrian nodded almost imperceptibly. Your father saved my life in more ways than one. When we came home from Vietnam, I was angry, lost, ready to throw my life away. Vincent helped me find purpose again. He showed me that honor and loyalty weren't just military concepts. Vincent finally found his voice. Adrian started a construction company too when we got back. Built it into something bigger than mine ever was. But he did it quietly, without fanfare, without taking credit. The guests were beginning to understand that everything they thought they knew about both families was incomplete. The Romano success story was built on legitimate business practices, but protected by a friendship forged in war. Adrian Marcello's reputation as a dangerous man served to shield them from actual threats. Isabella held up the photograph one more time, looking directly at Michael. This man has been a guardian angel to my family for 3 decades. He's risked his own reputation to keep us safe. And you want to condemn him based on gossip and speculation? Michael's face reddened with embarrassment and frustration. Isabella, you're being naive. In our world, associations matter. Perceptions matter. Then maybe, Isabella said slowly, our world needs to change. The ballroom fell into stunned silence. 300 of Chicago's most influential people watched as a young bride challenged everything they believed about power, protection, and the price of doing what's right. But the biggest shock was still coming, because Isabella had one more revelation that would transform not just the wedding, but the lives of everyone present. Just the wedding, but the lives of everyone present. Isabella reached into her bouquet one final time, her fingers closing around something small and metallic. When she pulled it out, gasps echoed through the ballroom. It was a military dog tag, tarnished with age but still clearly readable. This belonged to my brother, she said, her voice breaking slightly. The brother I never knew I had. Vincent's face went completely white. He gripped the back of a pew to steady himself. Isabella held the dog tag up so everyone could see. Private Daniel Romano, killed in action, Saigon, March 15th, 1972. He was 19 years old. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Even the photographers had stopped taking pictures. My parents never told me about Daniel, Isabella continued, walking slowly toward Adrian. I found his things in our attic 3 months ago while looking for my grandmother's wedding veil. Birth certificate, baby pictures, letters he wrote home from Vietnam. Adrian's composure finally cracked completely. His eyes filled with tears as he stared at the dog tag in her hands. Daniel was your best friend, wasn't he? Isabella asked gently. You and my father both served with him. The 3 of you were inseparable. Adrian nodded, unable to speak. Vincent buried his face in his hands, 30 years of suppressed grief finally surfacing. Isabella's voice grew stronger as she continued. Daniel died saving a village full of children from enemy fire. He threw himself on a grenade to protect them. My father and Adrian tried to reach him, but couldn't get there in time. The guests watched in stunned silence as the true story unfolded. This wasn't just about war buddies protecting each other. This was about guilt, loss, and a promise made over a fallen brother's grave. After Daniel died, Isabella said, my father and Adrian made a vow. They would honor his memory by protecting innocent people, by building something good from their pain. She turned to face the entire ballroom. That's why Adrian Marcello has spent 30 years watching over my family. Not because my father saved his life, but because they both failed to save Daniel's. Vincent finally found his voice, raw with emotion. We promised we'd look after each other's families, but Adrian never had children, never married. He poured everything into keeping his word. Adrian wiped his eyes, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel was supposed to come home and marry his high school sweetheart. He was supposed to take over your father's construction business. He was supposed to be the best man at your wedding today. The revelation hit the crowd like a physical blow. Isabella had been named after her deceased uncle, not her grandmother, as everyone believed. The family's success, their protection, their very survival had all been built on a promise made to a 19-year-old boy who never came home. Michael stood frozen at the altar, finally understanding the magnitude of what he was witnessing. This wasn't about criminal associations or business arrangements. This was about family, sacrifice, and love that transcended death itself. Isabella walked over to Adrian and gently placed the dog tag in his weathered hands. "He was your brother too," she said softly, "and you've been honoring him every day since." Adrian closed his fingers around the metal tag, tears streaming down his face. "I failed him once," he said. "I swore I'd never fail him again." "But you haven't failed him," Isabella replied, her own tears falling freely now. "Look around this room. 300 people are here today because you and my father built something beautiful from tragedy. Businesses that employ thousands of families. Charities that help veterans and orphans. Communities that are safer because you chose honor over revenge." She turned back to face the crowd. "Daniel Romano died at 19, but his legacy has lived for 30 years through the actions of two men who refused to let his sacrifice be meaningless." Vincent walked slowly down the aisle toward his daughter and his old friend. When he reached them, he pulled out his own dog tag from beneath his shirt. He had worn it every day for 30 years. Adrian did the same, revealing an identical tag hanging around his neck. Together, the three of them stood holding pieces of a young man's memory, surrounded by hundreds of people who were finally beginning to understand the true cost of freedom and the true meaning of loyalty. Father McKenna stepped forward, his own eyes wet with tears. "In all my years of ministry, I have rarely witnessed such profound love and dedication. Perhaps we should take a moment to honor Private Daniel Romano before we continue with today's celebration." The entire ballroom rose in spontaneous unison. 300 of Chicago's most powerful people stood in silence for a 19-year-old soldier who had died 50 years earlier, whose sacrifice had shaped all their lives in ways they never realized. Michael finally moved from the altar, walking slowly toward Isabella. When he reached her, he didn't speak immediately. Instead, he looked at Adrian Marcello with new understanding. "Sir," he said formally, "I owe you an apology, and I owe you my gratitude." Adrian studied the young man carefully. "For what?" "For protecting the woman I love, for honoring your fallen brother, for showing me what real strength looks like." Michael turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we came here today to witness a wedding, but we've witnessed something much more important. We've seen what happens when good men refuse to let tragedy define them." He looked back at Isabella, love and admiration shining in his eyes. "I thought I was marrying a beautiful woman from a successful family. I had no idea I was marrying into a legacy of heroism and sacrifice." Isabella smiled through her tears. "So you still want to marry me, even knowing the truth about my family's protector?" Michael took her hands gently. "I want to marry you more than ever, and I want to learn how to be the kind of man your Uncle Daniel was, the kind of man your father and Adrian became in his honor." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. What had started as a shocking revelation had transformed into something beautiful. The truth hadn't destroyed the wedding. It had elevated it into something sacred. But Adrian held up his hand for silence. "There's one more thing," he said quietly. "The Torino threat I mentioned earlier. It's not just about revenge against Vincent." The applause died instantly. Isabella felt her stomach clench with fear. "They've been planning to kidnap you during the reception," Adrian continued. 3 cars full of armed men are positioned around the hotel. They wanted to use you as leverage against your father's testimony." Vincent's face hardened with protective fury. "Over my dead body? That's exactly what they're counting on," Adrian replied grimly. "They want you to do something reckless so they can eliminate you both." The wedding guests began looking around nervously, suddenly aware that their celebration might be under siege. But Isabella stepped forward with calm determination. "What do we do?" Adrian smiled for the first time all day. "We finish your wedding, and then we show the Torinos what happens when they threaten family." The Mafia boss reached into his jacket, and several guests tensed. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "Tommy, he said into the device. It's time. Make sure they know we're ready for them. He hung up and looked at the assembled crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, you're perfectly safe, but I suggest we move the reception indoors and keep the celebration going. The best way to honor Daniel Romano is to live fully and fearlessly. Isabella looked at Michael, at her father, at Adrian, and finally at the dog tag still gleaming in her hand. Then let's get married, she said with a radiant smile. Daniel would want us to celebrate life, not fear death. As Father McKenna prepared to resume the ceremony, the sound of sirens began echoing outside. Adrian's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it and nodded with satisfaction. The Torino problem has been handled, he announced quietly to Vincent and Isabella. The FBI has been tracking their movements for weeks. They walked right into a trap, but the most important transformation was yet to come. Because as Isabella Romano prepared to become Isabella Castellano, she was about to make one final decision that would change not just her own life, but the future of everyone in that ballroom. Isabella looked around the ballroom one final time, seeing everything with new clarity. The crystal chandeliers that had witnessed decades of celebrations, the marble floors that had supported countless dancing feet, the ornate ceiling that had sheltered generations of love stories. But now she saw something else. She saw the fear in her guests' eyes beginning to transform into understanding. She saw her father's shoulders straightening with pride instead of shame. She saw Michael looking at her with deeper respect than ever before. And she saw Adrian Marcello standing quietly in the back, a man who had carried the weight of protecting others for 30 years, without asking for recognition or reward. The decision crystallized in her mind with perfect clarity. Father McKenna, she called out, her voice ringing through the ballroom. Before you pronounce Michael and me husband and wife, I have one more request. The priest nodded, sensing the importance of the moment. Of course, my dear. Isabella walked toward Adrian, her wedding dress trailing behind her like flowing water. The guests parted automatically, creating a clear path between the bride and the man everyone had feared just minutes earlier. When she reached him, she stopped and looked directly into his weathered face. Adrian Marcello, she said formally, for 30 years you have been the silent guardian of our family. You have asked for nothing and given everything. Adrian's eyes widened slightly, uncertain where this was leading. You never had the chance to walk your own daughter down the aisle, Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger. You never had the opportunity to give away a bride or welcome a son-in-law into your family. The realization hit the crowd like a thunderbolt. Several women gasped audibly. Isabella extended her hand toward Adrian. Would you do me the honor of walking me back down this aisle? Would you stand with my father and give me away at this wedding? The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Adrian stared at her outstretched hand, as if it might disappear if he moved too quickly. Isabella, Vincent said softly from behind her, are you certain about this? She turned to face her father without lowering her hand. Dad, you and Adrian made a promise to honor Daniel's memory, but Daniel isn't here to walk me down the aisle. His best friends are. Vincent's face crumpled with emotion. He walked slowly towards them, understanding dawning in his eyes. You want both of us to give you away. Isabella nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniel should have been here today. Since he can't be, I want the two men who loved him most to take his place. Adrian finally found his voice, thick with emotion. Isabella, I'm not sure that would be appropriate. People will talk. Let them talk, she replied firmly. Let them see what real family looks like. Let them understand that love and loyalty aren't defined by blood alone. Vincent reached them and placed his hand on Adrian's shoulder. Brother, she's right. We've hidden in the shadows long enough. Daniel would want us standing together today. Adrian looked at both of them, then at Michael, who was watching with obvious approval, then at the 300 guests who had witnessed this extraordinary revelation. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took Isabella's hand. The ballroom erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Grown men wiped tears from their eyes. Women clutched their husbands' arms. Even the photographers seemed stunned by the power of the moment. Father McKenna raised his hands for silence. Ladies and gentlemen, love takes many forms. Today we witness not just the union of two people, but the healing of old wounds and the honoring of sacred promises. Isabella positioned herself between Vincent and Adrian, linking arms with both men. Together, the three of them began walking toward the altar where Michael waited with a smile that could have lit the entire city. As they walked, Isabella could feel the shift in the room's energy. The fear had transformed into respect. The whispers had become murmurs of admiration. The tension had evolved into something beautiful and sacred. When they reached Michael, both Vincent and Adrian spoke simultaneously. "Who gives this woman in marriage?" Father McKenna asked formally. "We do," Vincent and Adrian replied in unison. "In honor of Private Daniel Romano, and in celebration of the family that transcends bloodlines." Michael stepped forward and took Isabella's hands, but first he turned to address Adrian directly. "Sir, I promise you that I will protect her with the same dedication you've shown her family. I will honor the legacy of Daniel Romano through my actions as her husband." Adrian studied the young man carefully, then nodded with approval. "See that you do. Family isn't just about the good times. It's about standing together when the world gets dark." Father McKenna opened his Bible, but before he could begin the formal ceremony, Isabella held up her hand one more time. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the crowd, "there's something else you should know. The charity foundation that Michael and I are establishing as our first act as husband and wife will be called the Daniel Romano Foundation for Veterans and Families." She looked directly at Adrian. "And we want you to serve as the foundation's first chairman, if you'll accept." Adrian's composure finally shattered completely. He covered his face with his hands as 30 years of grief and guilt poured out of him. Vincent wrapped his arm around his old friend's shoulders, both men crying openly in front of Chicago's most powerful elite. The sight of these two strong men weeping over their fallen brother's memory moved the entire ballroom to tears. There wasn't a dry eye in the house as people witnessed the raw power of love that endures beyond death. When Adrian finally composed himself, he looked at Isabella with wonder. "You would trust me with something that important?" "I would trust you with everything that matters," she replied simply, "because that's what family does." Father McKenna smiled through his own tears. "If we're quite ready, I believe we have a wedding to finish." And so Isabella Romano became Isabella Castellano in a ceremony that none of the 300 guests would ever forget. What started as whispers of fear transformed into tears of understanding. A mafia boss revealed as a guardian angel, a war hero's sacrifice honored 3 decades later. A family's true protector finally stepping into the light. Sometimes the people we judge from a distance carry burdens we never imagined. Sometimes the most feared person in the room turns out to be the most loyal. And sometimes a wedding becomes something far greater than the union of two people. It becomes the healing of old wounds and the birth of new hope. Adrian Marcello walked Isabella down that aisle not as a criminal, but as family. The Daniel Romano Foundation would go on to help thousands of veterans and their families. And 300 of Chicago's elite learned that real power isn't about intimidation. It's about keeping promises to the people you love, even when they're no longer here to see it. What would you do if you discovered your family's mysterious protector? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories that will change how you see the world.